Hey Chris, how's it going?
Pretty well. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I first question I just want to start with is you've quite the impressive list of scores under your belt. But The Wild Robot is your first animated feature. So I was curious if there was something that was mentally different for you in the process of scoring an animated film.
Um, well, first, I think it was exciting for me because it goes back to my childhood in so many different ways. I mean, I actually wanted to be a cartoonist when I was a kid. And I went to cartooning school and like just kind of decided to stick with piano, but it was an equal love for a long time. But it also was the space that I realized the power of music for film and TV early on, where I would watch especially, those cartoons that didn't have any dialogue like Tom and Jerry or,
Mhm.
Silly Symphonies, and so I was really, really excited, and also when I saw how much they were going to pull from early animation with their approach visually, it made me excited to pull from some of that stuff, and for reference-wise, when I thought about how some of those pieces have, like, some of the greatest classical music of all time in them and, like, these incredible orchestrators and these amazing melodies and things like that, and so being able to write music that rose to that level of musicality and having a film like this that demanded a lot of emotion from music, had a lot of space for music, would require it to be that, muscular and intricate and detailed. And then difference in process, I'd say it's having that much time and that much time where things are just continuing to be refined and refined and refined and honed instead of like changed and rearranged. Like working with a lot of live action, they have the ability to extend scenes or add scenes or do reshoots or all of these things that make it so that I might approach a scene and then 3 weeks later it's completely different or not there anymore. And with this, I started writing when it was just black and white pencil sketches that were
Oh, wow.
words cut together. And I was able to write for a scene when it was just a black and white pencil sketch. And then when they did the previs, see how I wanted to adjust the music for that. When they started to do early animation, adjust for that. So having almost 2 years on the project really allowed us to refine and hone in the sound of the film in a really intentional way.
Wow. I'm glad you brought up the kind of the emotional way that music really works because I've seen the film twice. Both times, what like pushed me over the edge for crying is the I could use a boost part of your score, which is just it's stunning. It's beautiful, but it does make me wonder how you kind of draw this line of making sure the emotional response that you are creating in the viewer is earned instead of like this hollow feeling of sentiment versus sentimentality.
Such a great question. I think it's trusting instincts and visceral responses. Like I'm somebody that it actually takes a lot for me to cry or get emotional outside of the or just kind of in general,
Yeah.
but especially outside of the context of art, where I'm um, even in like very emotional moments in my life, like
Mhm.
almost like something's broken inside of me where I can't really tap into that. And so music and film is a space where that kind of unlocks in me in an interesting way, but I also feel like it only unlocks in moments where it has been earned and it feels very natural. And so a lot of my process writing is honestly like chasing that feeling and like trying to make myself naturally feel a certain way. And so when I think about
Mhm.
the migration sequence with I could use a boost, um, it took a long time to hone in that cue. Like it was probably all said and done, it was probably at least 2 months or so, or maybe even more just on that one cue, and it was a lot of trial and error. My first draft was completely thrown out, like, my second draft was, like, half thrown out, like, it was just a lot of making sure that it felt right, and all of it was, like, once we got to a point where watching that sequence made us emotional almost every time watching it, then for me, I'm like, "Then I can trust it," because then it's like,
Mhm.
there's something else that 1 plus 1 equals 3 kind of thing where like somehow we're still getting emotional about something even though we've seen it and we know what's coming. So it's trying to find those things and just again going on this scavenger hunt until we find that, because anything else it feels like obvious that it's trying too much or it doesn't land in this involuntary visceral way.
Mhm. I'm a crier, but my sister is sounds a lot like you, only cries very few times. And I would like you to know she's also a musician and she's loves the score and it made her cry.
Oh,
So
oh, that means a lot. Wow. That's a hard thought.
so Roz's theme has a lot of synth influence, and then the themes of the island animals have like glassware and like cowbells and things like that. But I was kind of curious why you still decided to use man-made type objects for the wild part of the score.
Yeah, primarily because this story, while Roz is kind of at the center of it, it's her as this individual going to this island, and so thinking about this singular character set against this like pretty massive backdrop, it felt like the thing that's predominantly there is natural and organic. And then in terms of the man-made aspect, I mean, there are a handful of things in the percussion that are like found objects, like blocks of wood and like I mean literally like tree branches and things like that are like in the sound of the score. But I also honestly was inspired to use like glass bottles and teacups and like some like tin cans and things like that because of the idea of like inevitable pollution that probably has happened. Like I think about the times in my life, like I've gone to like pretty remote places of Alaska and like I don't know, like places in the Caribbean, like all this stuff. Like I'm always so surprised. Even in like Thailand, I was on this like hike in pretty remote part of Thailand and then like still saw trash in the river in there, so it definitely was inspired by this idea of like some of those things probably still being in this island no matter where we are, especially when you project it into the future. And then some of the metallic aspects, like there's metal pipes and like even an oxygen tank and stuff like that, were the idea of this island's physical impact on Roz. So like a lot of the percussion in my mind was like thinking about animals skittering through the forest and what that sounds like, but also the idea of these animals like scratching on her and this island kind of like imprinting on her as well.
That's awesome. The theme of Fink is, I think, one of the ones that really stands out, and it morphs in such like a fascinating way throughout the course of the film. And so I was kind of wondering, when you are doing reprisals and variations on a theme, how far do you let yourself go? And are you concerned about maybe the average viewer not like catching the sonic cues that it was a return to a theme?
Yeah, I love that question. Yeah, I think I love it so much because that's the thematic development that I fell in love with was like people like John Williams, where you hear a theme and it's so subtle that it's like, actually the end of Anakin's theme is actually a little quote of Darth Vader's theme. And like you actually really only know it if you're listening in that way. But I also think that it's subconscious that people
Mm,
can feel it and hear it. And like when things are done that intentionally, when certain melodies or harmonies are reserved for certain characters, that like when they're reprised, even if it's a different key or even if it's slightly reharmonized, that it's something that people will actually still connect to. And for me, it also becomes more interesting when I watch it in the context of a movie like this, where, you know, sometimes we fear that maybe the audience is not smart enough, or I don't know what it is, but we will repeat something verbatim over and over and over again thematically. And for me as a musician, I'm just like, man, I've heard this theme so many times now at this point in this like 2 hour movie. And so like, I feel like that's just not as interesting and not as like it doesn't trust the audience enough, and I really love trusting the audience with the fact that like the first time you hear Roz's theme, it's played in a certain way. When you hear it during the Truce theme, it's like reharmonized and like has this more optimistic feel to it. Or Fink's theme, like you said, think about the clarinet version in the middle of the storm, and it's like very sweet and doesn't sound like the same thing. But and it also becomes like an Easter egg hunt where somebody that is more curious can do more digging and realize like, oh, that theme is actually here, here, and here, and like it's developed in this way. So yeah, it's to me something that people feel subconsciously and also is exciting when people dig into it more.
yeah. Thank you so much, Chris. The score is really beautiful.
I really appreciate it, Tina. Yeah, thank you.
Of course.